Recently in class, discussion about the lack of voting sparked my personal interest. I decided to attempt to tackle this topic via the interest of myself and of society. So let's get started. So, politics is a personal based interest, meaning we want to appeal to policy and politicians that promote our interests. It seems politics is a game that excludes anyone that seeks any simple solution. But in reality, politics is as simple as solving your existential crisis. It's just very hard to give it a black and white, for sure, right and wrong answer. So the corruption that emanates from both sides, it results in ideologues that perpetuate to you different viewpoints that give you a headache if they're overheard. I think we've all gotten that dizzy feeling from overhearing a certain commentator or a certain news outlet, and then we come to kind of grow disdain for them, even though we might actually agree with more than what we let on. So this is even more of a problem now because in the early 2000s or the 90s, I would have to tune in to Rush Limbaugh's radio show. Now, because I watch one or two videos of Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk, I'm now thrown into conspiratorial and racist far-right hot takes that may or may not contain some bits of truth in them, but in reality are kind of manipulated just like numbers to give you a certain viewpoint. So both sides have a hand in corruption, so don't feel attacked if you happen to dig Charlie or Ben Shapiro, because I admit I too see videos that I think kind of perpetuate the victimized approach to explaining the Eurocentric society that we grew up in. Speaking for the United States only. I don't know what's going on around the world. So generally speaking, if someone were to recognize the corruption emanating from both sides, you could expect them to maybe have just a disdain for voting in general and neglect taking part of it as a whole. At the same time, you're kind of living up to a duty that many people in history, especially in this country, have fought for. So it can cause some kind of guilt trip and give you a little bit of cognitive dissonance due to your values and how much do you respect the past, but how much are you going to be angry at the present? You can push back on voting elements like the Electoral College or the population vote versus the electoral vote, but until you have the policy in front of you that you truly want that is changed, voting is really your only option, which can leave you kind of in an annoying state. I think that someone, if they were to try to stop in class because of their views being alienated, or maybe the class doesn't have the same viewpoints, their learning speed is not as fast as everyone else, or you just don't like how the lessons are taught in general, it just doesn't suit your learning ability, it's still your job to push your viewpoints and try hard, even though in the end you can always recall back certain injustices brought to you by the situation. So our two-party system has smothered alternative viewpoints in terms of what can actually overcome the amazingly powerful two-party system and all of their donors and all of the support they have through mainstream outlets. So we all have heard the Green Party, and we'd love to believe that they have a chance, but we've all heard they're never going to win. Voting third party is kind of like throwing your vote away, some would say. And while these statements aren't entirely true, there's truth in them in a way where it's basically talking about the impact that you're going to have by voting for these people. So while we can hope for RFKJ or Jill Stein or Cornel West to have an actual shot, in reality their chances are slim, and really their best case scenario is being someone who comes in after the main candidate is selected and gives a little speech and endorsement at their commencement or another event that they host around the country. So for someone not really into politics but really concerned just about the outlook of their country, just like you'd be concerned about the outlet of your house. I mean, you don't know exactly how the electricity works, but you'd like to believe that the electric company has it all figured out and that there's no, point of worrying that one day the electric grid will go out. So we do the same thing in politics. But the problem is it can be hard to wiggle into the conversation if you don't know what you're talking about. I find this very troubling for me personally because I don't know everything, and what you have on the internet is a bunch of like topic experts that are masquerading as basically polymaths. So they might know one thing, and that's really giving them a huge, compliment, because most of the time, through what I believe and just trying to stick it non-biasedly to you, they really aren't even topic experts. But I'm going to give them topic experts. But the trend of being a polymath that I think Jordan Peterson really took off from, I think that's becoming a little out of hand in terms of how influential these people are getting because they heard or read one study, heard one person, and now all of a sudden they're projecting and suiting themselves in front of a camera to let you know that they're the ones you need to be listening to. So the common Instagram conspiratorial business account will tell you that BlackRock and hedge funds, own all the politicians and they control everything and they're really the real bosses of this country. You have things like the Bilderberger Group that gets labeled as like the one a la Umar Johnson, the ones who tell the presidential candidates what to do or the president in office what to do and what to say and how to think. And I will say personally, I don't like that hedge funds buy out single family homes. I just don't like that. But I mean, that's just an aside. So we all like to believe that government operates justly. That's like the idea. And legislators are doing their job to represent the constituents, to represent me. Judges are ruling according to the Constitution, and elected officials are not using their positions for political gain. Clarence, so, we'd all like to assume that these government employees are not in it for themselves. And truthfully speaking, there's so many government employees, they can't all be in it for themselves. Some of them really are just trying to make a good living, and working for the state is pretty nice. But you have to remember that most people who go into lobbying are ex-politicians. So what they do is they go from a decent, modest living as a congressman or a senator to making a whole lot of more money lobbying for certain policies and representing certain companies. So we all know the controversy, for example, around Nancy Pelosi and how she always seems to know the stock deals to get. And she's always just selling right at the beautiful time, and her husband's rich. But I wouldn't say that, these hedge funds as a whole control everything. And if you really want someone on YouTube to give you a breakdown of why you just really can't believe every conspiratorial thing you see, listen to the Plain Bagel. He has a variety of videos, and he's actually a financial asset manager, and he really does give you a grasp and a realistic picture of what universal economics looks like, and particularly how it affects each country and policy within each country. And he just gives a really good, unbiased, and educated explanation of all these things. So broadly speaking, people are largely unsatisfied with their voting options, I would say. I would not say I've met any, hyper Biden supporters, but I have met some pretty hard-line liberals, and I think there's a little bit of a difference there. I've never really met a hard-line Trumpy. I know that they're out there, and I've definitely met Trump supporters, but I've never met anyone who is going to shit themselves at the first letter of hearing his name. Like, I haven't seen that kind of, fandom, at least in my life. So this two-party system has increasingly been polarizing and congested with misinformation, disinformation, hateful rhetoric from both sides. It's really become like a bad girls club just in the political scene. And I'm not old enough to remember, but from everything I watch, this was not the case 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I keep forgetting it's 2024, so maybe 20 years ago things were a little bit of the same. So we get someone like Trump, who in my eyes resembles Obama in the way that he's so captivating to a certain audience. While I believe Obama was a much better orator, Trump has his own genius in the way that he can galvanize his troops. And it really reminds me, looking historically at the Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, and is really a good example of he's someone who promoted Arab nationalism and really tried to, in the face of European intervention, really tried to separate Egypt and nationalized certain industries and really pushed for a country that was self-governed and self-dictated. However, Nasser was very dictatorial in the way that he allowed information to be disseminated through the country. So you had the war against Israel in 67 where he took a major blow and lost embarrassingly, but at the same time he was lying to his own people, telling them what they wanted to hear just for them to hear the news in the end. And I feel like this relates to Trump in some ways because as he kept telling us that the election was rigged, more and more evidence just came out to say like this claim is just not founded in any evidence. And what I was looking for personally was other conservative YouTube heads to give me some glimpse of what he could be talking about. But when I see that the most far right people don't even support this claim, I really can't give it any credence. And going back in our own history, many of the American founding fathers resented and feared a two-party system. George Washington warned against the divisive nature of political parties and their polarizing effects on society. Even figures in the 1990s, i.e. Ross Perot, warned against our two-party system, once saying, "Republicans and Democrats are the same guy admiring himself in the mirror." The idea that business interests and corporate donors, lobbyists, all have a bigger sway in decisions made by our legislators, governors, and presidents is again a reason why we, as just constituents and normal Americans, we find it aggravating to have faith in our political system. Younger generations are constantly urged to vote. Voting tables on campuses, there's libraries, you can register at the DMV, offering complimentary voting registration and even the post office when changing your address. But in the end, it's not something that really excites you anymore. And besides the main presidential election, voting rates are just not what they should be. So despite these attempts, political conflict is distracting, and cultural news in itself and how you can really be into the Drake versus Kendrick beef, and that to you can be like the biggest topic for you for 3-4 weeks, and you can totally miss so much of what's going on in the political realm. So it can be hard to jump back into it like, yeah, I'm gonna go vote now, and really have an educated vote and not just be voting based on a trend or a couple of good music filled and cut up very nicely Instagram reels that really caught your attention and swayed your heart. So I really liked this when I was young. In middle school and high school, the notion is, finding out what you believe. And it's applicable talking to the average person. But media coverage of politics is much more polarizing. It doesn't really give you a chance to dictate your own opinion. It tells you what the opinion should be, but it underlines it in a lot of talking points and facts and talking heads they might feature in for a few minutes. So it's really blindsiding growing up and leaving the educational realm of being in a classroom and how catering and coddling can be and how it can nurture your growth, and then leaving that and then going straight into trying to decide who you like more, a corrupt president or another corrupt president. What I found mostly in my life is that the quietest people generally have the most you should listen to, but usually don't like to say a lot. And they really give you a level-headed approach, and they're not going to yell at you for viewpoints, because anyone who gets mad over an opinion, I really draw a line, because it has to be something where I have to see it in your eyes that you truly feel like historically this is detrimental to a group of people or yourself or a certain kind of person. I don't look at the Civil Rights Act and think every civil rights activist who got mad at the opposing side was not right in their mind. I think they were totally in the right to be a little angry, and maybe very angry. But today speaking, it's very hard for me to draw the line, because sometimes it can really seem like to the other person like the issue that they're talking about is very, very important to the livelihoods of people moving forward. So it's hard to give it that kind of credence while also trying to develop your own opinion, because you don't want to feel like a terrible person. You don't want to feel like someone who's going to be on the wrong end of history. So in my current state of Louisiana, our recent gubernatorial election said a lot about voter interest. The Republican candidate, Jeff Landry, won a landslide vote against his Democratic opposition. He got 51% of the vote compared to 25% for the Democrat Sean Wilson, with about 3 million registered voters out of 3.5 eligible. Now, people were hopeful for a solid turnout. Only 36% of eligible voters showed up to vote, and this dealt a great blow to the sentiment that it was going to be a good turnout. It appears that people do not care about lower level politics because it doesn't carry the same polarizing draw as a presidential election, despite it having more effect on your immediate community. And to make things worse, only 15 to 18% of eligible voters are expected to go to the polls for the statewide runoffs that occurred in 2023. So the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the State Treasurer, these are positions I admit that I don't find much utility in, and I don't blame or accredit any successes or any demise that comes to my community. But nevertheless, they have a sway. And I feel it's a problem within myself as well, because I'm also inflicted by this malaise, this just boredom with voting and how it's going to affect my life. Playing the devil's advocate, I guess you could blame grade school in prioritizing teaching history, focusing on events that feel very distant from our current reality. I admit there could be an argument that history needs to be taught with a certain connectivity to today's events. And what that does is it might make you remember events of the past differently than just a bunch of facts. So government class in high school was a joke. It's not very hard, and as long as you pass the civics exam, which was the easiest thing ever, I think you don't need an IQ over 10 to pass it. It's very, very easy, and the answers really are all online. The range of questions cannot be that wide. And it just, again, is another example of a chance where when your minds are young and you have a youthful brain that is capable and more, I would say more malleable, and has a better opportunity in that moment than any time else afterwards to really learn what it is to develop your own opinions, and then what it is behind the other opinions of others, what underlines all of that. What history do they point to that makes them think certain ways? Ideally, everyone would recognize they have a responsibility and a duty to this country to participate in all levels of government. But it doesn't work like that. Consider the conspiratorial Instagram page I mentioned earlier. If a few hedge funds really do control legislative interests and sway decisions, why would I feel the need to vote? And if it really was like that, that wasn't a true statement, but if it was like that, now why would I vote? Because I would argue I shouldn't. I would argue something big should happen if that truly was the reality. Now the problem is a lot of people truly believe that to be the reality, and that I will not argue that their influence is probably greater than yours and greater than mine. They don't have complete influence. And what we do, we lose the power, we lose sight of the power within ourselves. We lose the sight within the power of our communities. And also we lose sight of what human nature is, that no matter, what group you give a chance to, within each group and within each person, there is a little hint of selfish, narcissistic, and dictatorial vices, or I should say ambitions, that could maybe corrupt your mind to act in the same way that you demonize our current leaders for actions. So there's a bunch of fancy words, but basically what I'm saying is you could be the same person that you're criticizing and not know it, because you've never been given the chance. You've never walked along the road where you saw the persuasive elements of what could be and then walked along that further and further. We'd all like to believe that we're equal. That's the idea. Every man created equal, every woman created equal. But, what we do is, as someone becomes more and more rich, they are equal. They can vote only once. But the problem is they can donate a lot more money than you can. And I think that is more of a internal way of trying to tell somebody that I may not be more important than you, but I have more power than you. And I don't know if that's such an evil characteristic to have, because at the end of the day, you want your candidate to win. And the more resources you have, the more you can do. So if, you call me and I only have $10, but you call me and I'm like, yeah, give me 50. And I'm like, I only have 10, but I got a friend who has 100. You might call that friend and he might do more for you because he's capable of that. And that's really a simple way of saying that Elon Musk donating $59 billion to Trump is just because he can. It doesn't really mean he's a bad or good person. It doesn't really mean he loves Trump. It just means that he wants Trump to win. And that's a simple way of saying that there's really not much we can do. Every loophole that you try to find within political funding is going to get exploited. And once it's caught and then the loophole is filled, then another loophole will come out. So broadly speaking, like general presidential elections have seen amazing voter turnout. The increased polarization and bitterness between sides has created a political arena similar to the passion of football rivalries, and I'd call it, this is what I'd said, but it's like champion syndrome. You really want to see your side win. So ignoring and just catching brief highlights of regular season and playoffs is what most people do. And that's what most people do in presidential elections as well. But at the very end, when it's time to watch the finals, you have amazing turnout. And I think that's what people treat the presidential election as. So the battle between Biden and Trump was a personal vendetta, but also one where the other candidates' morals were in question by the candidate opposite to them. And what it did, it was a reflection against all supporters to not let themselves be seen as what the other side was demonizing them for. The characteristics that the other side is going to place on you, you don't want that on you. So you instill hope and argument into your candidate so he can rebut and claim that certain things that you're saying are lies. And here's why you're actually the evil guy. And this causes the ultimate definition of insanity. So despite, these things that can really drown away our interest of voting, what you can do is still try to change the world in your own little way. You can volunteer at local initiatives and just be a role model within your community. You can find ways to represent that person in the most ideal form that you would like to see in the world, that you feel like is mischaracterized by this media headline driven, just industries that, really govern our perspectives. Our politics is pretty polarizing, and middle ground will not be found, but it will be found in legislative chambers. State and local representatives really do have a chance to do the things that you wish to see in the world. And it really does have an impact when you think about the work that goes into a lot of these bills. And I am totally open to your ideas that these things are still governed by lobbyists and interests that sway, little things that they tack onto bills, extra spending and things like that really, again, make it annoying to think about. But I still have hope. Do I know why? I don't know. Maybe because I have to grow up in this country, and maybe so do you. I don't know how old you are, but I'm going to assume you're going to be here tomorrow. So in the event that you are, just be a better you, and know that the work that goes into representing yourself for the world starts at home, and it's a lot of work to be done. It's really hard. There's a lot of things, from cleaning to kicking out your bad habits, maybe getting on an exercise regimen, and the list can go on. So I'll leave you with that and a little bit of hope. And remember, we still have sports if you just cannot fathom anything else. So have fun in fantasy this football season. My name is Mohammed Tantawi. I'll see you next time.